there's always resistance to change. And I'll just throw this out there. The only person in the universe that really wants change is a baby with a dirty diaper. We either change and evolve because the technological Darwinism is in play. If people do not evolve, they're going to go by the way of the dinosaur. That's the truth of the matter.
My name's Tom Baldwin. This is Overruled by Data, the podcast for law firms looking to start their data journey or accelerate the journey they're already on. Brought to you by Integrata. Welcome, everybody. Today's guest has built one of the more ambitious data platforms in the big law market. Mark Thorogood is the director of data operations and software engineering at Perkins Coie, where his team was an early adopter of a DIY Lakehouse approach and has since layered on a logical data fabric to unify insights across the firm. Before his 25 career year in legal tech, Mark spent 12 years in the Army, where he learned the value of discipline, planning, and clear intent, skills he now applies to building and running data operations at scale. Outside the office, he's also an avid sailor, which gives him a unique perspective on navigating uncertainty and keeping a crew aligned, which is super cool. Today, we'll dig into how Mark sees data transforming law firms, the lessons from building early, what he's most proud of, and where he thinks analytics and AI are headed in the legal industry. Mark, welcome to Overruled by Data.
Hey, thank you, Tom. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so let's dive right into it. You know, your 25-year career in legal, you've led software engineering and data operations teams at Perkins and at McDermott. Looking back, what was the common thread that's carried you from early technology work to running such a large, complex data program today?
I would say the number one thing is focus on the critical data elements. When I was younger, I tried to boil the ocean. Now I just try to cook lobsters. That is the number one thing I learned. So be practical, focus on what matters most, critical data elements. And I could talk about, like, say, Elite, for instance. Elite might have, 6,000 tables, gobs of columns. You're really looking at about 4 or 5 that do your work to cache. And you can boil that down to about 20, 30 columns at most, and then you can describe the whole money conveyor belt. So focus on what matters most, critical data elements.
The money conveyor belt, I love that phrase. It's a good one.
The money conveyor belt.
And we're going to dig into this a bit later, because I think it's a critical part that folks get really caught up on when they're starting their data journey, is where to start. So let's circle back to that, because it's a really good point. You spent 12 years in the Army before jumping into your legal tech career. What habits from that experience, whether it's discipline or planning or after action reviews, ARRs as they're called, still influence the way you lead technical teams?
I would say in the Army, you have to have standards. You have to make things iPhone simple for people. You can't overcomplicate things. Because if you think in the military, we're all kind of uniformed. And we can deploy, 2 million people to Kuwait, eject someone from the country, and be back before Thanksgiving. Law firms can't do that because we're too bespoke, too idiosyncratic. You just got to focus on those standards. I remember what they trained me at: do things correctly, do the simple things correctly. Don't get too cute with the way you're trying to do.
Love it. I love it. Outside of work, you and I have talked before. I know you're an avid sailor. Does sailing give you any unexpected parallels to building and running teams, whether it's reading the conditions, balancing risk, or keeping the crew aligned?
I would say that there's a lot of parallels between sailing and how you're going to run a team. Because the biggest thing is you got to make sure that the crew knows their job. They got to be read into what that passage is. And I'll share with you a story. There was one person where the husband died because the wife didn't know how to turn off the autopilot. The guy fell off the sailboat in the middle of the Atlantic. They kept going. She was able to get onto the radio. But by the time they could get someone out there, the person passed away and perished. And I know that when I get a crew there, I got to make sure that they can save me if I fall off that boat. You're 70 miles out in the ocean doing a passage. That's the number one thing. They got to be read in on their plan. Same thing. If something goes wrong, and things will go wrong, every day they go wrong, they got to be dialed in on what their job is, what their roles and responsibilities, and what they need to react to. So the way you lead a team on a boat is communication is the same way you're going to do it in an organization.
And you think about kind of meshing those two together, right? Your 25-year legal experience, your military service and sailing. How would you describe some practical examples of your leadership style in practice in building your team at Perkins?
I would say the practical things: be supportive, be a teacher, empower people. You got to make sure that they're trained, competent, and confident in what they do, whether they're on a vessel in the middle of the ocean or if they're trying to implement a dashboard for, a high-ranking partner. They got to be trained, competent, and confident. And what you do as a leader, what I do as a leader, is I'm constantly teaching people. I consider myself like a chief resident at a hospital. Everyone are doctors. They have their cases. They come to us. We talk about their cases, what the etiology is, how to deal with them, what are the symptoms, what the treatment needs to be. And I'm constantly training these so that they can go through their profession and become skilled doctors. No difference.
Awesome. Switching gears a little bit, everybody has sort of this aha moment in their career where they realize like, oh, shoot, data is really important and we don't have it. Was there a specific moment or a project where that clicked for you, either at McDermott or at Perkins, where you really fully appreciated the need for a data backbone, not just a unified platform for reporting, but something more enterprise scale?
Well, one, I'll talk about the importance of data and how it helped is basically data is a representation of reality. You can then take the data and you can make models, you can do what-if analysis, and you can get more precise in your judgment. We all, face Goldilocks situations. Do you buy too little? Do you buy too much? Or you all want to get it just right? And I remember way back when, this is when the velociraptors ran the earth and there's certain things called servers with storage area networks. I had to make sure we had enough storage area network that would accommodate all our email files. So we built the model and we nailed it. I mean, right where it was, and the model was good for the next 4 to 5 years. It was constantly tracking. We didn't overspend. We didn't underspend and have to scramble. We got it just right. And that's where I started to see the importance of it. And then I just basically said, hey, if it works for me, it'll work for others. Maybe, I'll apply this to the practice groups. And I had a few trials there and I was successful at it. Actually, I was the manager of application services, loved the job. I was conscripted into running data because they basically said, hey, you can solve these problems. You're going to become the director of data operations. It wasn't my choice. It was Rick Howell's choice. I'm serious.
I have no doubt. That's the my high school basketball coach's one of his favorite sayings was the reward for a job well done is the opportunity to do more of it. It sounds like for you.
If I wouldn't have built that dashboard with Power BI back in 2016, I wouldn't be the director of data operations.
Exactly. I know you've spoken at a few events and you've talked about standardizing and centralizing data before taking on big projects. What convinced you that that was the order of operations that matters most other than just plugging in tools?
I kind of saw the trajectory that's going on in the world. And I looked at some of the systems that I admired, like Amazon. You can see that they had a centralized, integrated service, and they actually used it to run their operations, and then they sold it as Amazon Web Services. So their system where they simplified and integrate, brought things together. I can see the consolidation in markets. I can see the Walmartizing of markets, where you see all these mom and pop shops. And the analogy here is that if you look at plug-in and play-in tools, it's all like the mom and pop shops are there, and you can replace it with a super center. So just walking around and experiencing my reality, I would see the analogs and I say, this is the natural flow of the technological Darwinism that we're experiencing and where it's going to lead. So that was my motivation behind it. And it actually paid off. We did some statistics recently. We cut costs by 1/15. We were able to produce 12 times more finished rows than we were ever doing compared to last year, where we were using like on-prem technologies. And our data set cycle time went from months to sprints.
That's amazing.
So you can see it, and it's right there. So we've lowered the cost to produce finished data products that wrap around a business problem and produce that value. Now, if I would have had a bunch of tools, I would have had this like junk drawer, if you will, this cacophony of things that would be very difficult to understand and manage. But you just look at the natural reality out there. Just walk through the next Costco and say, hey, how is this supply chain working? And you'll see it.
If data is like navigation at sea, what was the first GPS signal your team built that replaced gut instinct with real guidance?
I would say the gut instinct with real guidance was, basically sizing out that sand, that storage area, where we nailed it. The gut instinct, you had this swelter of conflicting opinions. There were all the people who were like, oh my gosh, I need more storage. It was going to be very expensive. And then there were the other people who were cheap and cheerful. I don't need as much. And we would have wound up building this, cottage industry of bolting things on. And I was like, no, we nailed it just right. We were able to throw an arrow instead of just, guessing, trying to feel around in the dark as to where to go.
Circling back to something you said earlier, you trying to find sort of those practice projects. Was there a GPS signal on the practice side or the business side where the outside of IT, they started to really kind of perk up and realize the power of data?
I would say there is various ones of those. And if you really look at like the analytics of the work to cash cycle one, that's more of an operational, but it does apply to a lot of practices. You got engagement scores versus profitability, where you're taking a whole bunch of activity data that's coming in either through Salesforce, through email, through, the Phoenix badge system. People came on-prem, and you consolidate and you're comparing it to outcomes. And they're starting to see better ways, how they can adjust their practice, how they can customize their practice to the voice of the client, what the client's purchasing habits are, what the client's needs are, and they can prep for that. They can see it in advance. What is the next logical matter that they would have?
On the show, we like to profile firms that are early in the data journey. And in legal, we do a decent job of sharing, what we can for others' benefit. And in this section, I wanted to kind of pivot over to the choices you made building out a Lakehouse when there really wasn't a lot of understanding of what it was, particularly in the legal market. Things that you really, feel great about, like those decisions you double down on today, what you might do differently to the extent you can share. So maybe just start with a high level, because I think your implementation of a Lakehouse is probably the most unique of the ones out there of firms that have done it themselves. Maybe explain a little bit about what you did, and then we'll kind of dive into more questions from there. But just for everyone listening, kind of talk about the platform you have today.
It's infrastructure as code that's in the inside of Azure, but we can move that to the Google Cloud Platform or Amazon Web Services if need be. On top of that, we use Delta Lake Parquet files, as our standard. It's all scripted in Python, SQL, or, YAML on top of that. And then we use either Databricks primarily or Microsoft Fabric for more to Power BI, data flows there. The Fabric and Databricks are both running the PySpark engine. And then on top of that, you have Power BI, and it's encompassed with a data virtualization layer. We happen to use Denodo. And what that enables you to do is that you have a one-stop shop to pick up your data, whether it's from an operational system or it's from an analytical system. They get one view into it. If you're using Power BI, obviously, you're not going through the virtualization layer. You're just going through whatever the dashboard is there. And that also enables us to have a chatbot and agentic AI. So we use GPT-5, and we use the O3 GPT reasoning engine for the agentic AI. Well, in addition to a vector database that we have to translate the natural language into something that's parsable by the machine. That's kind of a high level thing. I hope that made sense. I hope I didn't geek out on people. Some people
No,
probably
this
loving
is,
it. Other people like, what the hell are you, robot? The hell?
I think 2 years ago, folks would have probably not had been exposed to a lot of those concepts. But I think today now firms understand at least the fabric concept of a lakehouse. Microsoft's done a great job of socializing that concept to even the legal market. So folks are definitely more familiar with it. The Denodo thing, I think the data virtualization is not a concept that a lot of folks are familiar with. And certainly, at least at ILTA, folks that hadn't heard of Databricks got a healthy dose of understanding where Databricks fits in and the power of Databricks as a supplement to what is native to the Azure data stack, right? So all those nuances, I think firms are starting to appreciate more. As an early, we've been talking about this journey with your firm, Mark, for quite some time. Looking back on any of the choices you made, again, knowing that like you were one of the very first firms to do this, was there anything that you would have done differently out of the gate?
Oh, of course. And I'll touch on that. But one thing I want to talk about the architecture and where the inspiration came from, just briefly. I looked to the banks and I looked to the big four.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't look to legal. And if you look at what BlackRock, TPG, and, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of New York Mellon are doing, you'll see they've been using data virtualization since about, 2005 onward. So that's where I got the inspiration for that architecture. I looked to the banks, follow the money, if you will. Now, your question was, would I do something different? There was a lot of choices that we made that were good choices. We had a lot of people we benchmarked off of. As you know, Tom, Fireman was part of that. You were part of that. James Anook was part of that. We used various consultants. We went to Gartner. We spoke with John Laidley. If anyone read anything about the DAMABOK, or which is the data analysis book of management, he's the governance czar. We also hired, Bob Seiner, who was non-invasive data governance. So we had a clear view on what the road ahead is and what other people did. But when they were talking to us, they were like, man, we don't have any law firm clients, and I read Bob Seiner's book, and I was like, I'm going to give this guy a call and say if he'll do a consulting gig on data governance. And he did. And it really kind of paid out. We had our operating model there, so that was good. What would I change? Kind of like that song, I Want to Go Back. One of my favorite songs. I wish I could go back, but I know I can't go back, I know. Or something like that. I don't know the lyrics, but the melody's in my head. I would provide a business glossary. I started with a data dictionary. A data dictionary, the addressable market of a data dictionary is the geeks. The business glossary and showing the life cycle, like go to market, intake to client, deliver to value, bill and collect, productize the knowledge so you can force feed it back into the market and have that cycle go. And then what each component of that cycle means, like say in the bill and collect, you have the hour work, the hour billed, the hour collected. It's very easy, and describe these concepts that they wrestle with every day in very clear, explainable terms. That's what I would do differently. I wouldn't have started with the nuts and bolts data dictionary stuff and try to factor that out. I would have went from the top down instead of the bottom up.
Do you have an example of that concept? Have you built that out since then?
Oh, yeah, we have an example. So what I just described, I would probably provide a data dictionary or the business glossary, not a data dictionary. That's what I would do differently. And I would start with something like this. This is the basic value stream that we all share. And you can see go-to-market. And the go-to-market, you can have your CRM system, you can have your proposal system, you can have your firm's website. Your intake system where you open matters, you're probably going to have some like Intap or something of that type. And then you're going to deliver the value. You have all your practice management systems, whether it's Compulor, Foundation IP, Patsy Wade, your DMS. Those are the things. And you got to figure out those critical data elements that link them together. Remember, these things right here, the connective tissue is very, very important. And then you can have your bill and collect. and then your productized knowledge, and then that goes back into how you present yourself to the market, how you identify prospects, and you develop and you nurture them into leads. And then I would describe the systems underneath that. Next thing I would do after that, if I just took the bill and collect, I would say, hey, by the way, of all these things, all these data elements you typically experience, this is what you probably understand: the hour worked, the hour billed, the hour collected. In terminology, it would be like WIP or AR or receipts. And the metric is either pace, billability, or collectability. What is your percentage of, is this a good billability ratio? Or are you billing 80% of your time, 90% of your time? If it's lower than 80, it's probably a problem. And then what are the sources? For me to describe WIP, I just need these two tables and I only need a few columns. And then this way, instead of starting with the haystack, you start with the needles of the haystack and you give that to people. So really, in analogy sense, if you will, instead of giving people a dump truck of dirt, I'd give them the diamonds on a velvet backdrop. I don't want my users going through all that dirt to find the stuff that really is valuable to them. That would be the difference. I would have started from the top down, in addition to going from the bottom up. So you kind of like a big vice. But I started from the bottom up, took a lot of time. Why did I do that? The bottom up is more concrete. It's easier. It's like Maslow's hierarchy. You start with the physical stuff, you go to the stuff that's more social, and then you self-actualize. I would have started from the self-actualization and go down. That's the one thing I would have done differently. I hope you enjoyed that.
No, that was great. No, that's awesome. Thank you, Mark. It makes perfect sense. I think a lot of firms struggle with how to ground themselves in that sort of initial jumping off point, and they get their axle twisted up in a starting point. They think they have to, to your point, boil the ocean when they really just need to find a lobster or two to cook and serve up on a platter and make it, perfect.
Exactly.
Speaking of sort of, okay, going back to your journey building the Lakehouse, you start to build momentum, and then you realize you probably hit some point where there was a scaling problem. And it could have been on the schema, cost control, taxonomy, governance. Was there one point where, as you started to get more usage and adoption, that you hit that scaling point that, again, had you known in advance that this would have been a problem or this would have been an issue, you would have addressed it earlier or simpler?
I would say there's APIs out there that are not going to be as performant as the vendor will say. You are going to wind up API caching at some point in time for these reasons. Let me enumerate the reasons because they're so burned into my memory. Here's my emotional baggage about APIs. 1, they're slow. 2, they may not be dependable. They'll error out. 3, they may cost you money because every API call, especially if they're rate, and they might rate limit you too. So you have all those issues going into play. Generally speaking, if you're dealing with clouds, and you'll be dealing with clouds, you'll be very, very motivated to cache API results. It's just a reality.
Let's dig into that a little bit, because I think sometimes it's an awesome point because we see it on our side as well. I think a lot of firms struggle with the vision to move past 3 or 4, source systems. Like once they get the accounting system, a little bit of client data, matter data, people data, they can't see past that. The API content really, especially if you start enriching, docket data, let's say, or feeds from PitchBook or deal point data, you start to really get some interesting enrichment. Folks have a hard time with that. Can you give some examples of API sources without naming the ones that don't perform well, but just generally like the API sources and how you're using them?
I would say we are getting docket data. We're getting data from the USPTO. We're getting data from, Pacer. We get data from other sources. We're looking at implementing the Sally standards. There's an API out there. We get data from, actually a lot of API data from various places. Salesforce, IntraHive, those are all API. They're cloud services that we're, pulling the data back from.
Yeah, what's the primary use case for pulling in that API content?
Usually benchmarking your data, making it richer. There's a lot of understanding that you can gain from your practice, and also you can start to compare your practice to other folks. There's a lot of value there. There's some things that are very strategic, but I can say you can pick up a lot of market signals by harvesting that data and seeing where you stand in the spectrum of say, a business domain.
I'm just going to pivot here a little bit. A lot of folks that have got an on-prem SQL data, MDD, EDW, whatever you want to call it, think that they can handle all these data requirements with an on-prem SQL data platform. How would you respond to folks that have that position when you think about all the data enrichment and data integration and services you're providing?
It'd be very, very difficult. If you got a small use case, you might be able to get away with it. If you're trying to do serious data enrichment, you're probably going to go to medallion architecture at some point in time, where you're going to have bronze, you'll have, silver and gold. We actually have copper that falls in between it, so we have 4.
You don't have a platinum layer yet? Come on, Mark.
No, we don't have we might have a platinum layer. I don't know.
It's coming.
I'm never saying
coming,
never,
I'm sure.
But I'm not going to have layers sprawl. That's one thing I'm going to push that.
Feels like it. I've heard of platinum layers, but I've not heard of copper.
We
Explain
use copper. It's a combination of, I think, bronze and some others. I don't know what the combination is. I'd have to ask whoever invented that term. Doing it on SQL, no, that'd be very difficult. You'd have very limited capabilities. If you have a point solution, you might be able to get away with it. I wouldn't recommend it.
Let's talk a little bit about you've built up a team internally. Oftentimes when you build a platform like this in-house, you've got to rely on some folks. How did you find those folks? How do you reduce kind of that single point of failure when you've got a team that's building and maintaining and deploying and updating a product?
You find the folks through your social network primarily, or you can go to the market and then you got to whittle through a lot of resumes and you'll probably make a lot of mistakes, but primarily focus on your social network to find good talent. We don't operate as individuals. We may, but the people who are very successful in this world usually are very connected. So that'd be one thing. How do you guard against people leaving? People do leave. You have to standardize your systems. You have to make it simple. Simple is not easy, though. That's where, I learned from the military, you have the discipline to follow up and follow through. Not just get something working, but get it working right and get it working so it's repeatable. You have to have those standards there so it's interchangeable, it's Legoized. So you can mix and match systems, and you can also mix and match platforms and people if need be. I do celebrate people, so I don't want any of my folks to ever leave, but I know that that's not going to be the case. But how do you guard against that? It's like any company in the world. You just have to make sure that you have things that are supportable in the absence of a person.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. We're going to switch gears a little bit. And I know sometimes it's hard as we get into some of these things, sharing really specific, probably the most impressive projects and the things you're most proud of are the things that you might be able to talk the least about. But to the extent you can share, what initiative made you think to yourself, okay, this is why having a data platform made a difference, whether it was a client engagement analytics project, a self-service dashboard, or something else? Is there something you could talk about that really was like that, moment where you felt like, okay, we've really kind of flexed the muscle of our data platform in a meaningful way for the business?
I would say one thing is client portfolio budgets. Everybody talks about matter budgets, but if you have a large AFA or a large arrangement, you're going to have hierarchically arranged budgets. You're going to have budgets at the project level, you'll have it at a work stream level, you'll have it at the portfolio level, and you'll have it at the program level. And the clients will stipulate that. Accounting systems in the legal industry generally support clients and matters. But once you go below that, how do you group all those matters together into an AFA arrangement and track it over time? You have to build some meta layer, some middleware, and that can be on your Lakehouse to join all those bits together in the lens of the client. And then if you put some AI on top of it, you can say, am I on time and on task with this budget? Which budget is at the most risk? And it'll give you a reasoned response to it. So I would say that's the one thing that is much different, because right now, a lot of people do hacks to try to take a large portfolio or program and shoehorn it into a system that's not designed for that, knowing that our clients have systems that enable that, like SAP. Your large clients don't use law firm technology. And that was the difference. So now we're able to operate in the style and the manner that our clients expect. And our clients trust what they understand. And if they see a system that reflects them, they'll understand it, and you don't have trust issues.
Mark, when we think about the future of data analytics and AI and legal, I know you've talked quite a bit in various events about natural language on top of your data. In the next year or two, what's realistically possible for firms? You've got things like chat style retrieval with guardrails, RAG on enterprise content, even agent-like systems. And before we get into your answer, I know there's no shortage of practice of law use cases around AI, but I think some of the stuff you've been talking about is more on the business side, which seems to be sort of an unlocked area of opportunity for firms.
Well, we operate on the business side and also the practice of law side. I mean, we're using AI to understand various business cycles, whether it's the trademark, patent, or litigation life cycles, in addition to the work to cash life cycles that we see internally. So the AI is kind of universal. It can cut across all those different things. You just have to have the data that is kind of AI enabled. And what I mean by AI enabled is typically put it into a dimensional model or a graph model, something of that sort. Now, one of the things I'll say, what is possible for law firms? I think what is going to really be the next wave of innovation is going to be around agentic AI, agents taking questions that are very complex and providing very thought-provoking responses that are defensible, because the AI agent will explain how it gets those results. And I'll say something that I did yesterday. Basically, you said, analyze the legal work across all these practice groups for 5 years and tell me where we're growing or declining, and tell me which ones have the highest collection ratios or billing ratios. Tell me the trends over the past 5 years. That's what I posed to the agent. Now, the agent had access to all the data in the Lakehouse and also some operational systems through our virtualization lane, and said, go crazy with it. It produced a 36-page report that basically is like, hey, these are the things that we would recommend. Here are some of the geographies, the industries and sectors that you might want to emphasize, and here are some of the things that you might want to adjust. It was startling, and it did it pretty quick. It did it in about 20 minutes. The agent was doing these things, and then the report, it showed me all the queries and its thought process and the rationale for why it selected certain data sources and not others. Now, in order to AI enable your data, you're going to have to put a lot of metadata around. You're going to have to describe your data in ways that the machine can interpret. And then you're going to have to give it some cues so it knows what to emphasize or what to go to under certain context. But without that context, the machine has no idea. It's just like getting back to sale. And if people don't understand what you're doing, they don't have that context, they won't be able to operate with it. And by the way, in my sailing, I got trained by Margaret Palmer. She's the one who trains the people at Annapolis in the Naval Academy. And she told me flat out on day one, my communication was horrible. And I was mortified. And she was right. So the thing is you just got to supply that context. Don't make any assumptions. People won't know unless you tell them what to know. Same thing goes with the machine.
That was amazing. And I think our listeners would love to hear those practical use cases. I know for some firms, the idea of a lakehouse feels like a far off future thing, but since you're already there, obviously that can't be the end state. What's next? Where do you see the industry heading?
I'll say that we're going to have more of a business emphasis because a lot of the technical details will be handled with the machine. That's one thing that I see that's going to, because you can do a lot of Python coding inside of the machine and have it do the coding for you. I also see a lot of the semantical layers because we want to customize and tailor our products to our clients. So you're going to have to give semantical lenses that put it in their terminology. Like we have a client that, they don't understand what a matter is. They understand what a project is. So you have to make those translations so they don't feel lost. I see virtualization growing. A lot of people are providing virtualization. I saw virtualization, years ago. We virtualized so many things. If you remember back to the aughts, we virtualized hardware, right? There was all the VMware. And then we virtualized networks, virtual private networks. We virtualized software, Java virtual machine, your JVM. We even virtualized our currency, Bitcoin. And now you see all these people talking about zero copy, where you connect to data and you don't copy data, don't heave the data around. Enable agents to access the data so they can combine it in context so that they can make very profound, thought-provoking recommendations. So I see virtualization really, that's going to take off along with the semantical layer because they're kind of partners. If you see a lot of the virtualization, it's usually going to be in the context of semantical business facing layers as you translate the data into the tongue of the people who are more strategic.
That's awesome. Let's end with some practical tips for folks that are maybe on the fence about this or just trying to know where to jump off. We often talk to folks at firms that have a really well, mature, established on-prem data platform that in their minds has worked well for years, if not decades, and they really don't see the reason to move to something more modern. What would you say to folks in that position?
I would say that there will be resistance to change. There's always resistance to change. And I'll just throw this out there. The only person in the universe that really wants change is a baby with a dirty diaper. We either change and evolve because the technological Darwinism is in play. If people do not evolve, they're going to go by the way of the dinosaur. That's the truth of the matter. Personally, I experienced a lot of resistance on my own team. What really amazed me is that when I was pushing forward into the future, the people who pushed back the most were in my own backyard. I thought that they're my friends. They're going to run with me immediately, and they didn't. They did. But it was much more challenging. Now, also, I'll say this. What is the future?
Before you pivot off this, how did you get them over the hump? This is a really important topic. In your own backyard, you had folks that were resistant. How did you, because you can't do it through brute force. That's not sustainable. How did you get them to get on board?
It was hours and hours of discussion over months and years, and it really sucked the life out of me, but you can't give up. It's kind of like you might have someone in your family and you can see it's like you got to change. And if you don't change, your life is going to be miserable. You can't give up on them, but you know what they're doing is not good for them. And I'm sure everyone has these personal experiences. And I had that personal experience. It was never easy. I don't want to go through it again, but if I had to, I would.
Yeah.
And I would, what I wish I had an answer for you, Tom? I wish I had this answer. Here's the magic pill. This is super easy. I'd share it with everybody. You guys love me. I don't even want to profit from it. I just want everyone to have better lives. It's just not that way. You're going to have to put in the elbow grease. You're going to have to go into the gym and do the reps. This is the reality. I don't think there's any other way.
Yeah, fair. If you had someone who's like, hey, I need to be able to show value in 90 days, how would you advise them to get started?
I would need to know more about their story, about, 90 days. One, I would sincerely make this recommendation. I would look into the market and what the market offers, because the people in the market are the bumblebees. They go across all the firms. They know what's going on. And Tom, we go way back. And what you have done is amazing. I would say give you a call. And you're not paying me for this pitch. You didn't even ask me to say this.
No.
But I would say give you a call. You want to see value? You have these ideas. And what, the first time I met you was what, 2010 or something like that? It's been a long time. So I stole the boil and the lobster metaphor from you. It was in your presentation.
I was wondering, I said that, I thought to myself, that sounded familiar.
Yeah, you said that. I could actually show you the deck that you gave me, and I've been using it. I still use it. It's still valuable. Now, you're probably asking the questions like, should you go through a KPI? Should you get a dashboard? It depends on what people need. But if you really want to figure out how to have that time to value, go talk to the bumblebees.
Yeah. Yeah, fair. Hey, Mark, this has been awesome. I really appreciate your time. It's great to share some more stories, and we all really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with the market. Thank you so much. And there's another wrap to Overruled by Data. Thank you so much, Mark.
Hey, thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.
That's a wrap for this episode of Overruled by Data. If this podcast resonated with you, if you took one or two things away from it, you want to hear more from law firm leaders that have been there and done that, hit the follow button.